Good morning. As you're making your way in, I invite you to find your seats. We're about to get started. I'm so glad and grateful that you are here. We have seats in the front, and I know that makes some of you Presbyterians uncomfortable, but that's what is remaining. So you may need to find your way there. I'd love to open us in a word of prayer. Will you join me in prayer? God of us all, as we gather together, we pray that you would move us from people sitting in chairs near one another to your community. Help us to listen with curiosity. Help us to imagine a world that is more holy, loving, and reconciled. And help us to dream of the ways we can participate in the growing of your loving kingdom. Draw near to us in this time, that as we hear stories of encouragement, we might also be strengthened for the work by your Spirit. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, we are so glad that you are here. Welcome to those of you who are not familiar with Covenant. We are glad that you are here. And those Covenant members, we are also so glad to see you. Before I get a chance to introduce Michael and Ann, who are our speakers this morning, I'd like to share just a word about the season that we are entering into at Covenant. Many of you know that throughout the fall, we spent time grounding ourselves in our faith, rooting ourselves in a better understanding of our faith and planting ourselves in that. And the natural progression for things that become rooted and tended to is for them to grow. And so this season, we are considering how we grow in our faith. We will spend the spring learning and sharing and considering how our faith encourages us to grow, to see things with fresh perspectives, to experience new things, and to be transformed by our faith. So I look forward to sharing this season with you and encourage you to follow along for our many opportunities to grow this season. And to help us begin our season of growing, I am glad that we will get to welcome Michael Mines and Ann Morris to share their story. First, I'd like to share two things. One, a word about how this time will go, how it will unfold. Michael and Ann will share their story, and then we'll have a bit of time for dialogue, where I'll ask them some questions. You'll note in your chairs or a chair near you that you have an index card and a pen. If you would like to ask a question, I invite you to write that down and just hold it up gently, and I will come around. That allows us to moderate the conversation really well, but we would love to have the opportunity for you to ask questions. For those of you asking on Zoom, this chat is moderated, so you can put your questions in the chat box there. So let me introduce Michael and Ann. Michael is a graduate of Syracuse University and retired from the FBI in 2009 as a deputy assistant director. Following this first retirement, he then served in public agencies and private companies until his final retirement earlier this year. He is married to Beatrice, who is joining us here this morning, and he and she share two children and one grandchild who they've been visiting this last week. Ann Morris, who also joins us to share her story, is a graduate of Williams College and a retired journalist, having worked for daily newspapers both in North Carolina and Georgia for over 3 decades. She also served as the Director of International Mission at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Greensboro. And she is joined by her husband, Mark, who we are so glad is also here. Mark's waving in the back. She is the proud parent of 2 adult children. These are some of their wonderful accolades, but these wonderful accolades are not what bring them here today. What brings them here today is their shared story. So I'd like for you to join me in welcoming them as they share their story.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's really an honor to be here this morning. As some of you all may know, Bob Henderson used to be the pastor of our church in Greensboro before you all stole him. And so Bob and I go way back. So it's a privilege to be here. And Mike, this is your first time at Covenant, right?
First time at Covenant, first time in the city of Charlotte. I was telling folk the other day, you heard I was in the FBI a little bit. And Charlotte was one of those great offices that all the FBI agents wanted to get to, but you had to have connections, which I didn't have. So I'm thrilled to be here. And thanks for having us today.
All right, well, we'll get started with our presentation and then we'll have some time for dialogue and questions, I hope. So this first slide here, you see the pictures here of ancestors. And the woman there, Emily Taylor Morris, is my third great grandmother. And she lived at the Meadow Plantation in Virginia in the 1880s.
And the other images you see there, Gary Mines, he's also called Guy Mines, and his wife Martha also lived at the Meadow Plantation in the 1800s, and they both were enslaved there.
So my family, the Morris family, enslaved Mike's family, the Mines family. And so we are linked by this painful history of slavery. And our presentation today is about how we found each other and how we have connected with each other and other, what we will call today, linked descendants, and how we really forged a deep friendship and we're working together toward repair and healing. This is the first time Mike and I presented together, and so we will be learning with you all today. So thanks again for having us.
So bear with me,
Yeah.
my first time. So please be kind. You heard a bit about my background already. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., went off to college, decided to join the FBI, traveled around the country with that position. But as I traveled around the country, when I started with the Bureau, I was always curious about my background, where my family came from. And as a matter of fact, when I traveled around the country, my last name, Mines, is a bit unique. And I would challenge anybody in the room I would ask anybody in the room to raise their hand to see if they know anybody named Mines. You probably wouldn't, right? So as I traveled around the country, in the old days, you go to a hotel, they had phone books. You remember those? I would go into the phone book and I would go to the M's, and if I found a Mines, I would actually call them. And some would answer, some would not, because it was this guy calling me out of nowhere, right? But some of those who answered were actually distant cousins. And they had their roots back in Virginia. And also, as I worked in Newark and worked in Minnesota, I actually found two law enforcement officials. After asking a couple questions, I found that they were distant cousins also. And they gave me information about where their family was from. And it was down in Virginia at the Meadow. So I was always curious about my background and decided to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay. And my story is I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, and I always knew growing up that my family had owned slaves on a plantation near Richmond. And I'd been curious about that troubling history, but it really honestly wasn't until 2020 during the depths of COVID when, I had time. And it was also that period when George Floyd was murdered. And it was that period that I said, you know what, this is the time for me to really explore this. So I dug in. I read a lot of books. I attended Zoom workshops. I did a lot of genealogical research because I really wanted to get to the bottom of my family's history. And so in the spring of 2022, I had the privilege of going on a civil rights pilgrimage with an interfaith group from Greensboro. And we went to Montgomery, we went to Selma. It was a very powerful experience for me. And on the bus, on the way home, I just happened to be sitting next to a woman who, as it turns out, I think God probably put her there, is an amazing genealogist. And she focuses on reparative genealogy. She's trying to unearth stories, particularly of African-American ancestors for Black families. And it's a very powerful work that she does. And so I remember telling her, I've got this family history. I know that my ancestors were enslavers. I don't know much about it. I know here were the myths that I grew up with, that they were, quote, the good ones, that they were the nice ones. I grew up with the myth that my great-great-grandfather really didn't believe in slavery. He had just inherited slaves, so he kind of kept it going. And then this other myth, which is laughable, but it was true. This is what I was told, that after emancipation, the enslaved people left the plantation But then they came back because they realized it was really pretty good there. So those were all stories. And I think honestly, in the back of my mind, they kind of, I don't know, I think they sort of beat my conscience a little bit about the whole thing. So it wasn't really until fairly recently I got serious about trying to find the truth. And in that conversation on the bus, I asked, her name is Karen, the genealogist, I said, do you think it would ever be possible to find the descendants of the people in my family enslaved? And she said, let's try. So what happened over the next year was really, I think, a miracle. And through my research and with Karen's help, and I think a very clear assist from God, I found both white Morris cousins I'd never known, and then African-American linked descendants like Mike, who were willing to talk very openly and with a huge generosity of spirit about our painful shared history. So that's kind of how we got here. And now I'm going to show you a little bit about how this project evolved. All right, this was our first meeting, and this was even before you connected with us, Mike. We had a lunch in the fall of 2022. The woman in the front there is my cousin Kate Tweedy. You may recognize that name, Tweedy. Those of you who used to follow Secretariat, her mother was the sort of the trainer, the owner of that racehorse Secretariat. So she descends from the meadow. Robin Mines behind her is Mike's cousin, and she's a reverend in Richmond. Behind her is Sawney Morris. You'll hear from in a little bit. She's my third cousin. I didn't know her until this work. And she lives in New Mexico, and she grew up in Texas, New Mexico. She knew nothing about any of this Virginia history, being descended from enslavers. So this has been quite an awakening for her. And then we've got me, and then there's Joe Brown, who's sort of an elder in the community there, knows a lot of the family stories, and John Pegram. So that was our initial group.
If I could add a couple things, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You see there, Kate Tweedy, she mentioned, who is the daughter of the woman who owned and raced Secretariat. And like Anne, during the pandemic, I had some time on my hands, as we all did. I decided to do a deep dive into my family history, and I had two goals. I wanted to find my family lineage to before the Civil War. And I also wanted to find a plantation on which my family was enslaved. So through ancestry.com, I was able to do both. Fantastic. But I hit a wall, right? Because before the Civil War, as far as enslaved persons was concerned, there were not really records that I could, and ancestry.com is based on a lot of records. But there was a feature in ancestry.com that said, if you want to communicate with anybody else who's doing the same sort of research you are, just send this email. We'll reach out to that person and they'll email you back. Well, I'd also found that my family was enslaved by the Morris family, her family. So I sent that email out. Kate Tweedy reached back to me. She said, hey, I'm doing research on the Morris family and also the Mines family. So that's how I made the connection with Kate Tweedy. And she actually invited me and my family down to her house. We had a great dinner. We walked the grounds of the former plantation with my children. That's how we got started. And then Kate introduced me to Anne.
So this is the home of my actually second great grandfather, Dr. Barton Wister Morris. And this is the home where we ended up holding a big gathering this past summer. It's called Glamorgan, after the ancestral Morris home in Wales. It was built in 1851. We know through the census records that 28 people were enslaved there in 1860. The house was only built in 1851, so it was really a sort of a short period of slavery. However, the total number of people enslaved is much greater than 28, including the fact that Dr. Barton and his brothers actually purchased people, enslaved people, and then leased them out as a business. So this number 28 is really a little bit deceiving. So we were able to very fortunately hold our gathering of linked descendants at this home. And the reason is it's no longer in the Morris family, but the woman who lives there now was very generous and said, please, use the property. You're welcome to hold your event there. It was particularly important that we could hold it here for symbolic reasons, but also because after emancipation, the community called Dawn, an African-American community, grew up very near here. So people after being enslaved just kind of moved nearby, and many of the descendants still live there today. Did I lose my mic?
No, they can hear you, I believe.
So in Dawn, there are lots of mines, and so when Mike came to Dawn for the first time, he discovered there's mines, Loop Road, there's mines, hair design. So once you found your people, they were very much there, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to move on and talk about the gathering that we had. You want to share about that, Mike?
Sure. We decided, when I say we, it was me and Kate Tweedy, as you saw, Sonny and Robin decided to get together. We don't really have a name for ourselves. I guess we're kind of like an impromptu committee. We decided to bring the descendants of the enslaved and the family who owned the slaves together, right? We decided on June 24th to date. One of our challenges was getting the word out, right? Trying to notify everybody to have as many people as possible come. So fortunately, two of the folks you saw on the previous slide, Joe Brown and John Pegram, lived in the community, knew most of the family that was there. They got the word out locally. We also created a Facebook page, which, young folk need to do. So my son told me how to do that. So we put one of those together, got a great response. Reached out to Mineses and Tillmans across the country. Had some come in from California, Washington, D.C., all over. We had a total of about 180 people show up that day. And it was, in my opinion, a great and moving day. I had my whole family there, wife, children, brother, his wife, grandchild, to not only meet their cousins, but also learn of the history of our intertwined history, our family. So I guess we'll go to the other slides, but it was a long day. We had great food, great Southern cooking. We sang songs, we shared stories. I got to know my cousins. Just a little bit of background. Most of the Mines family stayed right near that plantation in Virginia, but I moved to Washington, D.C. My family did, so I had no connection with them. My father didn't travel back down there at all. So he had told me when I was young, your family's from this area called Dawn, but it was only just, a word to me. But it was really moving when I actually got a chance to visit Dawn, see those folk down there, and meet all these cousins and uncles and aunts that I'd never known all my life. And then, as Ann mentioned, I saw the Mines name on businesses all over. There was even a street with the Mines name on it. So it was pretty revealing and moving for me, but also for my children, as I mentioned to Ann, growing up. I had no idea where my family roots were from. I didn't want my grandchild to go through the same experience. So now my 18-month-old granddaughter knows exactly where her family came from, and she can trace her history back to 1800. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say one of the highlights of the day, I think, were some short talks that the planning committee, we each had an opportunity to share our stories and to speak. And so we have some excerpts of those just to share with you. First up, this is the Reverend Robin Mines. As I mentioned, she's a minister in Richmond. She has a very powerful story about just her experience growing up, and she speaks to some of her incredible, inspiring values.
I am here because unifying is what has been in my soul since I was a young child. Born in the Jim Crow era, I began to learn about the hatred towards me at the young age of 5. Once I began to attend school, I was no longer protected by the shelter home. I experienced racial attacks, walking to and from school. The year 1966, our brand new home on the south side of Richmond was attacked by the Ku Klux Klan members because we were not welcome in the neighborhood. What a crushing blow to realize that there were certain people that wanted me dead because of the color of my skin. The handling of forced desegregation in our public school system caused further racial divide and violent trauma in the city of Richmond, Virginia. But through it all, I learned to trust in Jesus. I learned to trust God's word. I am so grateful to be raised by the village that did not teach me to hate and retaliation, but to be aware, get an education in order to rise against racism and to love. That wisdom still resides in me today. I am.
All right, you want to introduce Sonny?
Yeah, the next clip you'll see is of Sonny Morris, Ann's cousin. She grew up in Texas and now lives in New Mexico, and she knew nothing about her family history as enslavers until last year. So when Ann contacted her on ancestry.com. So you'll see with this speech that her being there in her speech was a pretty emotional experience for her.
I'm here today in part to acknowledge that my ancestors did enslave the ancestors of most of you, as well as of others, and for much of 2 centuries, and that the enslavement must have been horrendously violent, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And that although slavery ended 158 years ago, a profound violence toward Black people continues, and it is anathema. I'm aware that without meaning to, I have benefited from our country's racism and at times contributed to it by acts of omission, failing to speak when I should have spoken, failing to give when I should have given. I believe that ultimately who I am is a result of my actions, that my own happiness or unhappiness is dependent on my actions rather than my wishes. I believe, along with Dr. King, that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I can't undo what has been done, but I can pledge to do what I am able, in every way that I'm able, to help repair what has been broken in the great circle of our human lives together. May it be so. Thank you.
So that was pretty intense, but we also had a lot of fun that day. And part of our goal was to break bread together. And so we made sure we had a wonderful meal. Mike mentioned we had everything from well, your favorite was the fried fish, right?
Fried fish was my favorite. Ate a little bit too much, actually. But it was a time for enjoying the meal and enjoying each other. Now, that was important.
Yeah. And then I mentioned the genealogist to you. She was there, and during this a period where we were preparing for this, she did an amazing amount of genealogy about the Morris family, but more importantly about the Mines family. And she had presented 8 family trees, really big. You know, some of them were like 8 feet long. So we set up these big tables, these U-shaped tables, and laid them all out so everyone could see. And in some cases, she had been able to trace some of the Mines ancestors back to even the late 1700s, which in African-American history is pretty remarkable. So it's a huge gift.
Yeah, she did an outstanding job, and 2 benefits. She was able to show folk who came there, their ancestry they had no idea about, number one. Number 2, there were folk there that said, well, no, this name should be over here, right? So they corrected her and also added to those family trees. So she walked away with information that expanded those trees. So that was fantastic. And just one other note, not too long after this, that the Mines family clan had their own family reunion on the former grounds of the plantation. And we invited Karen there too. So Mines from all over were able to see that family tree, that long table that you see right there, and it just keeps getting longer.
The other thing about this that's so cool is because she's such an expert, she's able to upload all of this information to Ancestry now. So the next Mike Mines is coming along looking for roots or family, or ancestors. It's all there on Ancestry now, and that's one of the outcomes of our project that I hope will have the most lasting benefit. So we did also have a time for storytelling.
We were able to sit with each other, tell stories, and then take benefit from the elders that were there, right? Who really gave us that oral history that you're not going to find on ancestry.com. So we're able to talk with Eloise Romaine, I believe. I think her picture's there. I don't have my glasses on. Okay, fantastic. Who's 96 years old. And she told stories about when she went with her mother to work in the big house when she was a young girl. Alvin Mines, who's one of my heroes, who's in the photo, I think top right, if I'm looking at that. I knew of Alvin from Kate Tweedy's book. She wrote a book on Secretariat. And Alvin was one of the grooms for the horses that were raised on that farm, as were other Mineses. So he was able to tell stories about when he was growing up, and he played on the former plantation, and there was a structure there that they used to play around. And he had no idea that we believe it's a former slave cabin. So it was great to hear those stories, right? So it put a little meat on the bones of that genealogy tree, that these are real people, real lives. And he told us about their parents and their grandparents.
And at the bottom here, Joe Brown in the blue shirt, he's one of the family elders who his story was so powerful, because he basically said, when my ancestors were enslaved here, we weren't allowed to learn to read or write. But today, I want to introduce you to some of my family members. And here's Chip Richardson, and he's an attorney in Washington, D.C. He just went through the crowd and named people who had college degrees, post-grad degrees, professionals, and was so proud, of what the family had accomplished. And it was extremely powerful, I thought.
Yeah, it was. He and I talked about that a lot while I was there. I kind of sat next to Joe because Joe is the fountain of all. He knows all, and was pretty instrumental in getting everybody there. Actually, when we were planning this thing, we were a little worried about two things: the weather, of course, but then turnout. And Joe said, "Don't worry about turnout. I'll get him there," and he did. But as Ann stated, he was extremely proud of looking at the Mines family, what they had accomplished, looking at where they had come from. So for me, it was good to see his pride in us that we've done well. That's the structure that we believe to be a slave cabin. That's on Glenmorgan. That is, sitting empty now. I kind of pause when I see this photo, and when we toured this structure is a little emotional for me. And when I first started this journey, and I first started talking with Kate and then with Ann, this was not in my plan, right? So, coming from law enforcement, you always have that plan. You got to follow that plan, right? And when it goes off kilter, So my plan was, again, to find my family before 1800 and also find a plantation. I did not count on or bank on finding a slave cabin or the descendants of folk that enslaved mine. That was a surprise, good surprise. Also coming from my field, you kind of try to be straight and not emotional when you walk into situations because you have to be professional. But I tell you, walking into the slave cabin was a little bit emotional for me and emotional for my children because it became very, very real for me. And I've done a lot of study on the civil rights movement, on the Civil War, and those issues, but I never really saw it up close. So when I walked the former grounds of the plantation and then actually walked into that slave cabin with my children, it was extremely emotional for me and also my children. Fortunate they had a chance to see that because we're so far removed, as you can see in those photos. But it was a changing experience.
The day after the gathering, we had another event, which was a smaller group where there's a national group called Coming Together. I'm sorry, Coming to the Table. And then the Virginia affiliate is Coming Together Virginia. And they sort of help facilitate and sponsor this kind of racial reconciliation work. So they helped us, they provided facilitators for us for these discussion circles. So we gathered at Randolph-Macon College, which is right nearby, and split up into smaller groups so we could really go deeper and have deeper discussions, facilitated discussions. So that was extremely powerful. There's some of the small groups. There's you and Mark.
Me and Mark, me and my new buddy Mark. Very interesting. I had my wife, she also participated. My son participated. My daughter-in-law participated to have these deep dive discussions. And mind you, it's the first time I know it's the first time I experienced anything like this. And I think it's the first time Anne also to talk about race issues in a honest and open manner and to kind of work through those. So I think walking into this exercise, no one knew what to expect. But I think at the end, we walked out of there with a better understanding of each other and a new determination to continue this effort of truth telling and healing. Would you agree to that, Anne?
Absolutely. And so going forward, we've continued as a group to meet. We have a few projects that have sort of grown out of this work. The two most immediate projects are we know that there is a cemetery, a burial ground for former slaves on the property that's unmarked. And we know that through oral history and through some documents. And recently we were able to have an archaeologist come out and walk the land with us. And we've identified where we think that this burial ground is. So we're in the process of, we're going to probably hire a ground penetrating radar, which is the technology that's used. And then we want to honor this burial ground, which has been totally, kind of overlooked by history. That's very important. And then the oral history project.
Yeah, the other project is, we talked about Joe Brown and some of the other elders. We want to formally collect their history and document that, again, add it to the genealogy and continue to make that available to the descendants of the enslaved and the enslavers. So hopefully we've started on that already. We're working with a professor from Randolph-Macon who's an expert in that. So we should really do a deep dive and a drive on that this year.
Yeah. And then this spring, we're also going to host an event in conjunction with the Black church in the community, really focused at the youth of the community, where we bring the genealogy information and we have a chance to sort of celebrate the history of the mines and the other families in that community and continue just to kind of, build community and hear from them what their priorities are. So I think maybe Grace has some questions for us.
I do. First, thank you, Anne and Michael. Will you join me in thanking them? We know this story is beautiful and I know very difficult to share. So thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to share some of your story with us. I'd like to first, I'm going to ask a few questions of Michael and Anne, but this conversation is for all of us. So as a reminder, you have index cards on your chairs. If you'd like to ask a question, please write that down and you can just hold it up gently and Catherine will walk around and grab those so that we can moderate the conversation. But I'd first like to talk to you both. We shared when we met on Zoom a little bit about the joy and challenge and all that came with your meeting in June. And then you both shared that you were going to go home and have conversations with your families, your individual families. Would you share a little bit about what those conversations have looked like in your individual families since the gathering, how the gathering has shaped your families?
I'll go first. Okay, I'll go first. Well, most of my immediate family came with me. So we had conversations on a drive down there and back. And I think most of the conversations were extremely positive. I had a cousin, I have a cousin who helped me with my research, years ago. And I've been trying to keep her involved in this, updating her with my research. And, she's just not that interested. I find that sometimes this information or this research, this story is painful for some, welcomed by others. The majority of my family members are extremely interested in this. Again, my brother came down with me and are waiting for the next steps. We've had various conversations about where this should go, what should we do. And my daughter, Lauren, in one of our trips down, talked about reparations, right? Her conversation was, as we walked the meadow, the former plantation, it was, she thought about how the wealth that the family was able to acquire through the ownership of the land and the work of the enslaved resulted in generational wealth for the family, for the Morris family, and not for the Mines family. So, how is that gap filled? How do we benefit from the work of our ancestors as the ancestors of the Morris family benefited from ownership of our family? So those are some of the conversations that we're still having. Anne?
Yeah, on my side, my immediate family, my husband and my daughters, my brother, his wife, and I had a first cousin who came. But beyond that, I mean, I reached out to lots of other cousins, and honestly, there wasn't a lot of interest. I didn't get any strong negative feedback, but just not my thing, and that's fine. Within our own family, though, my daughters who are in their 20s, they I think their take on this was, this is cringy, that they were like, ooh, cringy. But after the day, after they attended, I think they really came away with a different view, and that they're very grateful that this reckoning for our family is being done in my generation, that I'm leading this a sort of emotional labor, I think, and trying to unearth the truth and reckon with it and talk about it, maybe so they don't have to, that they can then take this journey a step further, right? I mean, I got passed down all these myths. I'm not, excuse me, I'm not passing them along to them. So that's kind of where my daughters stand at this point. Excuse me, is there water somewhere?
You some?
Okay, thanks, sorry. It's emotional for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just one more thing. My brother, whose name is actually the same as the, thank you. The same as the man who owned the house there that you saw. I think he felt pretty vulnerable because he has the same name. I mean, he's Barton Wister Morris V. So I think he was a little bit, nervous But he came away, I think, very much glad that we were doing this.
Thank you both. And thank you also for acknowledging the emotion behind this. I know that this carries incredible weight for both of you, and it's not lost on me that you are sharing such a vulnerable story in front of 100 strangers. So thank you for doing that. Well, maybe a few friends. We talked a little bit about what comes next. And really what I'd love to focus on is how you imagine, or maybe a better word is hope, that your experience and what you and your families have done might affect the greater conversation about racial justice happening in our country now.
I'll start again.
Thank you.
No, I thought about this question a lot. So, the analogy that I like to use is the doctor visit analogy, right? So at my age, I see a lot of doctors now. So when you go to the doctor, what is the first thing you do when you get to the doctor's office? You have to fill out a form. They ask you for your medical history, right? Then they ask you about your family's medical history. And you have to fill it out completely in order for the doctor to treat you properly so you can heal. I think what we're doing is being truthful about our past, recognizing it for what it is, moving forward so we can heal. So, looking at, this country, I don't think, we've had an honest, truthful look at our intertwined history to really tell the story, although it may be cringy and make others uncomfortable. The truth is the truth. And you cannot expect to heal until you tell the truth. One thing I found unique with Anne and her cousins is that I've been able to have very truthful, honest conversations with her for the first time in my life with anyone, any white person. I've had a lot of contentious conversations with white folk about this country's past as it relates to race, but never an open, honest one as I've had with Anne. So my thought is, if we have that conversation, nationally, then we can move to healing, right? Truth is the only path to healing. Anne?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think what I'd like to say about this is I think that we each have a part in repair as white people. We all have a piece of this, whether maybe some of you can relate to me. You have, histories in your family, that your family were enslavers. And so maybe, I would encourage you to get really curious about that and, maybe do some of your own research. It's really easy to do now. It's all digitized. I mean, you can really even do it on your phone. I mean, it's gotten so much easier to do. So you find out, what is the truth? Did my ancestors own slaves? Well, how many? Where? Maybe you want to take it a step further, like I did, and try to trace, the descendants. Maybe you want to have a similar kind of process. I mean, I feel incredibly grateful at the amount of generosity of spirit that Mike and Robin and his cousins have shown. And that may or may not happen in your case, but I feel like it's part of our responsibility to try to understand what our history is. The other thing is you may have, as we did, a lot of records in your basement or in an old piece of furniture because the white people had the records, right? During the time of slavery. And so we've been able, for example, to unearth a medical ledger that showed my great-great-grandfather's treating of enslaved people. So there are names there that may help somebody like Mike someday looking for his ancestors. So if you have any of that in your basement or in your attic, or dig it out, digitize it, make it available. It's part of the story. And white people have the records. Maybe you don't have that kind of history. Bob was just telling me, well, his family he grew up with an immigrant story, a very different kind of story. And so maybe that's your story. But I think the truth is, as white people, we still have benefited from this unfortunate chapter in our nation's history, the legacy of slavery. So maybe it's like going on a pilgrimage to Selma and Montgomery, learning more. I'm committing to education, which is what happened to me during COVID. Or maybe it's building relationships with people who just look different from you. We live in a very segregated world sometimes. I mean, churches are segregated. My church is segregated. Yours obviously is to some extent. So sometimes it takes a real intentionality, I think, to reach outside your comfort zone, to build relationships with people who look different from you. And I, again, feel incredibly grateful to have built these relationships now, which are real friendships based on trust and vulnerability and sharing our lives. And Mike and I both play pickleball, right? So we're going to play pickleball. I mean, it's everything from talking about these very painful things to the fun, just normal parts of life. And then I think finally just continuing to confront this history, this painful history, honestly. I'm sure you all know that in our country right now, there's a lot of controversy about this, how history is taught. Some states have passed certain laws, and this is going on in our country right now, and in North Carolina for that matter. And I just think that until we can talk about the truth and teach the truth, we can't get past it. We can't heal. So I encourage you to use your voice to speak up in favor of that, and be brave and be curious.
Thank you both for sharing that. And that is, I think, a big question on many of our hearts is, how do we take what we've heard from you and bring this into our own story and share that more broadly? We have a few additional, actually quite a number of additional questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to them all. If we aren't able to get to your question, please know we'll continue conversation following this time. But one question that came up, and you've spoken a little bit about this, but perhaps you'd be willing to talk a little bit more about, as you met with your families, did you experience any tension between the linked descendants throughout any of your time? And if so, how did you navigate that?
If I understand the question correctly, tension between our families or my family in talking about this?
So the question was between the linked descendants, but I
Yeah.
think your additional question is a good one. I'm curious to know of.
No tension at all, to be honest with you. I think it was, my family, my wife and my son, my daughter, it was all open and honest, right? I think, as I mentioned before, and I talk about this all the time, when I first met Kate Tweedy, I mean, she was just someone I met on the computer, right? And she invited us to her house for dinner. And we had some pretty deep conversations, and she was not flustered at all. Never seen that before. And I think the important thing was for me and my family was for someone just to recognize the truth and say, yeah, this happened, and let's work together and see if we can change some things. And that's it. And then the tension is gone. So there was none there. I remember I did me and my brother and Kate Tweedy were featured in a news article in a local newspaper in Richmond, Virginia. And there was a photographer who took our photos, of African-American female photographer. So after she took our photos, I went to my car with my brother. Kate went to her car. She drove away, and the photographer came to me, and my brother said, hey, what are you doing this for? How do you feel about this? Why are you working with this woman? I said, hey, she didn't own any slaves, right? And she's making a concerted effort to do something about it, right? So as I talk to my family and friends, or anybody who has an issue with what I'm doing here, my question to them is, what are you doing about it? This is what I'm doing. I can't do too much. I can only do what I can do. But if you want to change things, instead of just complaining or, commenting, what are you doing about it? And answer your question? Anne, I'm sorry.
I can't top that.
I want to share. I love, somebody wrote, first, you've both done something really cool.
Mhm.
And I think that's a sentiment that a lot of us are sharing. And you've spoken to this, but the question is, what would you advise us to do after we leave this room? And you've spoken a good deal about this, but if you'd like to expand on that, I'd love to invite you to. But I also would like to name that the fact that this question is coming up, I think shares that your story is making a ripple effect. And thank you for that. I hear so much healing and repair work that has happened among your linked descendants and the hundreds of you that met. And this is expanding beyond to our community. And I'm really intrigued and excited to hear energy around asking what we can do after we leave this room. I know you've spoken a little bit about this, and if you'd like to expand on that, I'd like to give you the opportunity. But I also wanted to name that.
Okay. Oh, okay. I would encourage you to do, what Anne described, right? If it interests you, delve into your background. We all have an intertwined history here. That's just the way it is. It's an American story. So let's find out about that. I'm a bit of a history buff, and so this stuff intrigues me, right? But it's more about just history. It's about our family, and it's about our time here together. There are problems when we talk about this topic. There always will be. But this helps us solve those problems. When you talked about tension between the linked descendants, I know that was a concern of ours when we had the cookout. When we brought everybody together, and we were, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to? And believe me, it was not an issue at all. It was not any. I was surprised. It was not an issue at all, and I think that those folk, my family, my cousins, welcomed it. To be honest with you, they really welcomed that history. They embraced Anne. Embraced her family with open arms, because it was finally an acknowledgement of that painful history that most want to hear about. But no, not that denial that is continually heard all around. It was that, yes, this happened. Yes, we're here with you. And how can we walk together forward? Right. So I would encourage you, if you are inclined, is to dig into your history as Anne did. She can tell you how to do it. She's done a very good job. And see if there are links there that you can connect with. You'll be surprised at what you would find.
Well, one final question that I think we have time for, though there are actually several more questions, but we are running low on time, is a point of detail. But somebody's asking, and I think they're asking for interest in doing something similar. Did you use Ancestry DNA to help discover what you discovered?
I certainly did use the DNA to help me find white cousins. That's how I found Sawney, in fact, was a DNA match. We have not found any shared DNA between our two families. Now, in some cases, you've heard the many famous stories, right? Thomas Jefferson, whatever, that there is shared DNA in some families and some there isn't. So we have not found that yet. It may be there. We haven't found it yet, but I think the DNA piece is an intriguing one, and can be a good tool to find certainly to find your cousins, and then you never know where it's going to lead. Though once you open up the DNA Pandora's box, be ready, because you don't know where it's going to lead, right?
No, I haven't done it yet. Anne is encouraging me to do it because of that Pandora's box thing she's talking about. I'm just a little suspicious. Again, that's just my background. I can't, unfortunately, you can take the boy out of the FBI, but right. I think I'm going to do it because we've had some conversations about possible crossover, right? And that would be another interesting twist to our story. And, again, this is the first time Anne and I are walking through something like this. So all of this is a learning experience for us. And it's like that never ending story. You know, we're finding another page and another page and another page. We're going to learn more through oral history. We walked together through an unmarked cemetery not too long ago, African American cemetery. And I tell you, it's one of the saddest things I ever did in my life. And again, trying to be that professional FBI agent, sometimes you see things. We walked those grounds and it was uneven ground. We had the archaeologist there, and the archaeologist said there are hundreds of bodies buried here. It was just an open field. And I mentioned to Anne that day this is what a second class citizen lives look like, right? These people here are gone, no marks at all. Devastating. What are we going to do with that, right? So that's part of what we want to try to commemorate and identify and then mark for those folks. So, we're walking through this journey together. I'm learning a lot from Anne. Hopefully she's learning something from me. And the journey continues. I'm sorry.
This is beautiful. I think we could continue this conversation for quite a bit longer. And yet I'm going to invite us to do so following as we close in prayer. We'll continue. There's pastries and goodies, and I think we might have just refilled our coffee, but I invite you to stay and join in conversation. But I want to thank you both and ask that you join me in thanking them one more time. I am noticing that you both keep mentioning opening Pandora's box, and I think you've opened Pandora's box for yourselves, but I think you've also just opened it for a lot of people in this room. And so I look forward to hearing what comes from your conversation for our congregation. We have many opportunities also this semester, this upcoming spring, to grow in your faith. And so I invite you to those conversations. Two that I'd like to invite you to as we think about next steps. First, we have Dr. Mitri Rahab, who's coming next Sunday, January, whatever month it is, January 14th, who's going to share about Christian hope in the Holy Land. And then we have Dr. Jamar Tisby, who will be coming to Covenant to teach on Saturday, February 10th, and then to teach again on Sunday, the 11th, and preach in the sanctuary. We invite you to those conversations and to participate in them broadly and widely. This is a season of growth for us, and I think you've opened up a willingness to grow. So thank you for that. Thank you for your story. I'd love to close us in prayer and then invite you to linger. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you that you continue to move and work on us. We pray that what we have learned, what we have heard, would not just stay in this room, but would move with us just as your Spirit does. Move with us, encourage us, challenge us, help us to grow, and help us to be truth tellers. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.